Okay, I'd like to invite Max, Sarah, and Stephen to turn on your cameras and mics for our panel, and welcome to you. Okay, we can see everybody right now. That's great. So yes, to our audience, please put your questions there. We'd love to pose them to our members here. But I just thought I'd start with one interesting contrast in the strategies, Sarah and Stephen, that you mentioned is that, one starts on a pack and finishes on slats and the other's reversed. So I wondered if you could just tell us like how those setups were developed. Not that one is, right or wrong. It's how did they come to be? Stephen, did
Um,
you want to take that first? Oh, sorry.
Sure. I can speak to that. Basically, what we've used for bedding in our grower barn, of course, is straw, and we feel that if possible, in order to save straw, we want to finish cattle on the slats if we can. Now we put rubber on the slats to create a comfort for the animals, hopefully reduce slip and injuries and that type of thing as well. But the idea of keeping the cattle on the slats for the finishing time frame is that we are able to reduce the amount of straw. It's easier to keep them cleaner, drier, and just manage that hygiene in a more practical way. So
And what about you, Sarah?
ours is more of like our barn setup as well. But also the smaller animal, if it falls, it's more likely to get back up. Whereas you have a 15 to 1600 pound steer slip and fall on the slats, they may cause into like an injury or something like that. So, and our setup in our slat barn are smaller pen sizes. So we like to keep truckloads together until about 30 days. So if like a health issue may arise, we can keep them together and trace it back. One of the big things we had actually this past summer, we had a group come in with actual foot rot in one truckload. So we were able to trace that back, what farm it came from, and treat it right away once they arrived.
Um, could you describe your foot bath protocols a little more for our audience? Like, remind us when you're using them.
Yeah, so we use it in our pack barn just right at our last implant, uh, just to prolong them to finish, uh, to make them be able to get to the finished weight that we are projecting at. But sometimes with using the foot bath, we also have to lift them and make sure that they're still, like if there's one that has somewhat of an injury that you've seen in the video, we will lift the foot to see the actual problem.
sorry, I was just going to say, in general, with regards to foot health, we seem to notice issues possibly with foot rot, that type of thing, but that generally more often happens on the pack. And so we feel that that's the spot. It's easier for us to manage those animals as well and be able to make treatments and that kind of thing. It also keeps us further out, like with withdrawals and that kind of thing too. It just gives time for that to clear up and straighten up. Generally, if we have an issue on the slats and we've got an issue with the leg, maybe a swollen joint, that kind of thing, we'll generally take that animal off the slats and move it into a separate space. Now with the new grower barn, we've freed up, like Sarah, she had said too, that I noticed that they had a number of locations where they had been keeping animals in different barns too, and we kind of grouped ours together at the home farm for the most part. But now we freed up some of these smaller barns. They work really well to actually move animals in that are maybe just not competing as well. Maybe they've got a little bit of an issue with hoof or with a swollen joint, and it just gives them space where there's just lots of room. And it's been a big help for us, I think.
Cynthia, I've come across lots of different feedlots that do exactly what Sarah and Stephen are doing. Finishing on slats or starting on slats. I think you need to pick the management that you like the best. I think you need to work with it. I don't think there's right or wrong. the only thing that I will comment on for me, I think it's number of days on slats that could be the most important. So whether you're starting them on slats or finishing them on slats, I think it's the number of days on slats. If you're going to have issues, it could be that. I do have a question for both of you though. When when are you guys seeing lameness, like more specifically digital dermatitis? Like what stage of the feeding period are you typically seeing?
I've seen it like in 1,000 pound steers. Like that one that you seen in the video, it was a black steer walking with a green foot wrap. Um, it got held up on the slats with just that one group. But I thought it was getting pretty stiff on the slats. Both knees were kind of swollen. So I was thinking, oh, maybe it's just an injury. We'll just pull it. But then I kind of got looking and I'm like, well, let me just lift the foot just in case. And sure enough, it was like a sole ulcer. So it all depends, but maybe it was caused from like toe nip, uh, like bruising in the hoof from like snow chunks when it was being pushed around as a calf, or we've had it in the bigger cattle where maybe it's just from a pen that was riding where it's bruising them the feet on like the cement. So
Yeah, like if you get dirt or manure shoved up into that white line, you'll get it. Yeah, you'll form an abscess, and you'll like. Is that the video that you showed of the foot trim there? Is that the one you showed?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So that,
or we've had like feet where the sole will grow over a chunk of manure and then
yeah.
um you'll have to like open it back up and dig all the manure out, and it will walk like so much better just by doing something as simple as that.
Yeah, it's a yeah. I think the term is double sole, but it's like having a hang. It's almost like having a hangnail. So if you had to walk on your fingernail, if we were walking on our fingernails and you had a hangnail to walk on instead, that's what it would feel like. So yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, that's you have it bang on. That's the most important thing to do. Pick up the foot. You actually have to diagnose it. You can't just, oh, we'll just give it a shot of this. You actually have to figure it out. Yeah, very well done.
What about you, Stephen? When have you seen digital dermatitis, or at what stage?
Well, generally, I think that, like Sarah would say as well, in the later finishing stages, it would show up more. We've noticed that we've been able to greatly reduce issues with digital dermatitis by switching up some of our protein sources and reducing the amount of distillers that we've been adding to our feed. We've been trying some different experimentation with soybean meal, cover crop, just looking at what other types of sources of feed we can use for protein, possibly reducing acidosis and that type of thing. Even working with sodium bicarb as well, to reduce potential acidosis in the stomach. Because my understanding is that when that happens, it tends to really affect their hooves and their feet, and in a short time it can create a flare up of whether it's strawberry or potentially even just add to a problem that's already existing. Um, so reducing, we want to keep the amount of distillers that we feed down, below 9 pounds per head per day, and manage that. Even in a finishing ration, we want to keep that even a little bit lower. So, and we'll use soybean meal to to derive more protein if that's needed. And we found, like I'm actually pretty surprised at the way the animals have responded. Maybe there's value in it, I'm not sure, but to me it seems like it's made quite a difference in our barn, even on the slats. I know, Mac has said too, we don't want to keep these cattle on slats too long, but we've had some cattle in there now for 7-8 months, and they still seem to be performing quite well. Now, our rations too are not going to be the type of rations that a lot of people would use in a finishing scenario. We tend to feed more roughage, and we'll keep them on our finishing ration for a shorter time. So we'll use higher levels of grain in the last 3 months of feeding, but we won't we won't be feeding high levels of grain for a long period of time, because we just feel that it creates more opportunity for acidosis, and it's just a negative for the hooves, and the cattle just struggle with that more. So I don't know. Do you have any comments on that, Mac? What are your thoughts? Like, do you think there's a significance in reducing the amount of sulfur in the ration? What are your thoughts?
Like, as far as, it's a good question. From what I understand, Stephen, as far as the sulfur goes, sulfur is there's definitely a high risk of creating polio or polio-like conditions.
Mhm.
As far as digital dermatitis goes and hoof health, I think protein is important. I also think the mix of micro and macro minerals is also very important. Zinc is very important in skin and hoof health. Like, when I think back when my kids were little and you have diaper rashes, what do you put on diaper? What do you use for diaper rashes? You use zinc oxide. Zinc is very beneficial for skin and like in nails and hooves. So I think that's very important to have make sure you've got a good amount of zinc in the ration for skin integrity and horn integrity, the horn of the foot as well. But you guys are both also saying exactly what we see in the feedlot data is that it's the later stages. It's over 1,000 pounds that are getting these digital dermatitis, because if they're on a pack, they're pushing a little bit further into the pack, if it's depending on how deep it is, and they've been exposed to those bacteria longer than a calf that's only 600-700 pounds. So if we focus on our hygiene and we keep that manure off of the back of the foot, that skin that's above the hoof, we keep that off there and keep that skin dry and the integrity of that skin better,
Yep.
the bacteria are less apt to get in there and cause those sores, so they're not walking around on their tiptoes like ballerinas.
Okay. Hmm.
As far as the acidosis goes, you have to watch. Like, acidosis can definitely cause what will cause laminitis, and then we'll get these cattle that have been on feed for a long time, and they have these, I call them elf slippers. They've got these big slippers and you'll see lines in the actual foot or in the actual hoof where you've had these insults affecting the lamina, which is the blood supply to the hoof. And the most important thing, yes, high grains will decrease the ruminant pH. Another problem, and I know Brent's talked about it before, and we've talked about it on these webinars before, is feed delivery, making them have access to feed all the time so that we don't get these ups and downs of ruminal pH, because that's what changes. That's what will cause those laminitis episodes. If we keep the rumen pH here and it's always here, we don't get those episodes. We won't have those episodes of laminitis. But if they go without feed and the rumen pH goes up, then it goes back down again as soon as they eat, then we get those episodes that can cause laminitis.
There's a question.
It's twofold.
Yep. There's a question here about using tetracycline either in a foot bath or spraying directly on the foot. Sarah, are you guys using tetracycline as part of your treatment protocols there for digital dermatitis?
Like, I just use like that cyclo spray that our vet has recommended. I'm not.
There's tetracycline in that.
Okay.
Yep.
I was just gonna throw out there, like, even putting sand in front of your chute so that they're not slipping on the concrete coming out. That's one thing that we make sure we have when we're processing. We just, even by lifting the foot, we've seen like a huge drop in e-kills on our farm. And if like we do have an e-kill, it's due to like an injury of like a broken leg. But it's never like lameness of like we cannot get it on the truck, because hopefully we've treated it before it's got to that point. Because sometimes, like, before we really, like, I've really got into learning about the feet. Like, if the infection gets right up farther up the leg into the knee and then working its way up, then the steer is lame and it doesn't want to get up, and then you have to get into it like an e-kill. We've definitely dropped our numbers in that just by looking at the foot and actually knowing what we should actually be doing with it. But yeah, I don't know, Stephen, do you lift the feet or get into that type of?
Generally, we've had opportunity to do that and learn from a veterinarian just what is happening and what's potentially causing the problems that we're experiencing. And so we try to reduce and modify our ration and actually hopefully reduce the need to be needing to do that as much as possible. That's what our actual goal is, to make that is not like have as natural an experience for the animal as possible. Whether that's accomplished through the different types of things that we're feeding to the animals, I mean, that might be a factor. I'm not sure, but I feel that over the years, like if I look at our track record over the last 5 years and the changes that we've seen and improvements that we've seen, I really believe that there is benefit in changing up our the way that we're approaching, whether it's protein, and the different things that we're feeding to these animals. Sorry, as far as lameness is concerned, yes, I'm not going to say that there's not any lameness. There certainly is some lameness, but generally what we're finding is more from injury and that type of thing. It's not as much the tippy toe strawberry type scenario that we had been experiencing years ago. And I guess, Mac, maybe a question for you would be, are we, like, over the past few years noticing less of this type of lameness than we had been, say, 4 or 5 years ago? Or what are your thoughts on that?
As far as strawberry foot, you mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I see it coming. I see it come in waves. I think most guys do a decent job cleaning out their barns in between groups of cattle, because that's a source of infection, the manure that's left over from the cattle that had strawberry foot in that pen previously. I think my take on it is that they come in with it a lot of times, or they pick it up on the truck and they bring it in. Okay. So when I look at the videos of your farms, you've got the hygiene in those pens is very good, and that's likely why you've got a lower amount of lameness or digital dermatitis on your farms, and that is the essence of combating digital dermatitis is hygiene and biosecurity. So if you can keep doing that and keep the foot dry and out of that manure, then you're going to be successful. So that's when I look at your videos, that's probably why both you guys are doing as well as you are. We do have pens that are bad, and they tend to all show up over 1,000 pounds, and they've been fostering it for a while, and then all of a sudden it shows up, and then we have to mitigate it.
Would you agree that the mats that go on top of the slats would actually potentially harbor some of that disease and maybe even spread it, from group to group as cattle switch pens and that kind of thing? What are your thoughts there?
You mean if you've got manure underneath the rubber, in between the rubber and the concrete?
Yeah, so it's been suggested, or the thought was there, that possibly that bacteria is actually living, in that space between the concrete and the rubber, and that can be something that harbors, that'd be a spuffer to, yeah.
Well, it'll live there, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's the oxygen, the amount of oxygen in that environment will be low. Mm-hmm. There's lots of substrate to live off. There's lots of manure there. Yes, it will live there. The biggest issue that we need to worry about is, does that get on the foot itself? So if that bacteria gets up to the skin above the coronary band and is allowed to sit there for a certain length of time and break through that barrier that the skin provides and just gets into the softer tissue, that's when the problem starts. So if we keep the manure off that part of the foot, as little as possible, it's going to grow. It grows. That stuff grows in environments where there is manure. Yes, it will grow there. Just like on the dairy side, just like where the picture I showed where you've got that big slurry of stuff being scraped by the scraper, it's going to be there. And then that cow bathed her foot in it.
Sarah or Stephen, do you see a difference in who fell from the source of calves? So like West versus local calves or beef on beef versus beef on dairy? Stephen, why don't you go first?
Our experience with crossbred cattle is it's we haven't been working with them for very long. I would say probably our tendency would be though to say that we probably there might be a little more struggle there with hoof health on that type of animal than say on just on a regular beef like a Western steer or a Southern American steer too. So yeah. But that's something that we're definitely interested in learning more about too. So, like I said, I'd probably have a better sense on that maybe a year or two down the road here, a better gauge on that.
Any other thoughts, Sarah?
I would say just maybe Westerns are a little bit more like better just because the genetics are there, but Virginia's, I don't know, like I would say they don't get as big too, the Virginias. So maybe I don't know, it's a hard say or like to say which one's better, but I, I would say if they're going to get an issue and it's in the pen, it could be between the two, really. Yeah, I don't really, I haven't really kept track of whether it's Westerns versus Virginias. And usually yeah, that's a hard question.
Sarah, I was going to say like the type of implant that you're using in the finishing stage, where like, are you using a really hot implant there or what do you?
Yeah, I would say we use a Rev 200, so it's probably, well, it is. We are pushing our cattle pretty hot. Uh, we do step them up if they come in heavier to the next implant just to see like and watch their gains and their weights as they go through. Will say I haven't mentioned this, but when I do a trim on a steer that is struggling, you can see the gains do go up within like 3 or 4 days. And usually when you let them out of the chute, they're right up at the bunk eating right away once they feel better after the pressure is released or I've dealt with the issue.
We heard the research suggesting that lameness is the second most common reason for treatment. You've spoken a lot about the preventative protocols you guys have put in place. Have you seen that affect your antibiotic use, particularly related to lameness?
Yeah, I would say we treat a lot for uh, like feet in the finishing stage, and obviously, um, yeah, I would say that's more that we kind of look at the in the finishing stage is trying to not saying we have a huge issue or a huge outbreak of foot abscesses, but like we just keep a good eye on our finishing steers so that we can actually get them to a projected weight that we want and break even on the steer instead of shipping them too light. But yeah, most of our treatment is based on lameness at the finishing end.
Your thoughts, Stephen?
Yeah, I would say I agree. In general, lameness is certainly an issue. But then this past season, we had a couple loads of Western steers come in that were pretty difficult to start too. So that actually created probably more of an antibiotic use on our farm than I would say we have in quite a while. But yeah, I was the comment that I was making with implants earlier on. There was really just that if we use implants that are maybe just a little more gentle maybe we're not going to get quite as much gain, but we might have less riding, maybe less injury. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Sarah, but I was just wondering if maybe you would consider experimenting a little bit with that just to see what effect it might have even on the hoof, like on the animals' hooves, and just determine whether or not you felt there was value or merit in that at all. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah, I totally agree. Like that is one thing that we do chat with our vet and our nutritionist to see like based on like like your farm practices, how hard do you want to push them? That is a discussion every year of like, do we want to stick to the same protocol based on like the foot health and how they're doing? Um, I feel as of right now, they're always going to have one, but have like an issue. So
Yeah. I guess the idea of just reducing that as much as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, trying to get to a scenario that is manageable. I know everybody's there's always lots to do on the farm, and with cropping season, and I know Brent mentioned this earlier on too about farmer feeders. We generally have a number of things to do in our day, and sometimes it's more on the cropping side or the harvesting side, whatever, but it can create a spot where it makes it more difficult to manage the animals the way that we would like to. So I feel it, like for us, I feel like on our farm we want to work on the preventative side as much as possible, and this is something that we've been working at for a long time. It's not something we just started a couple of years ago. It's something we've been working at for a long time, and that even goes back even to the crop production side of things, the way that we would aim for crop production as well, considering the feed that we're feeding our cattle. We want to focus in as much as possible on producing a crop that's going to be well received by the cattle, and a lot of even non-GMO corn silage, different things like that. Just something that's more palatable for the animals to eat, and something that hopefully puts less stress. We want to reduce the stress on the cattle, give them opportunity to actually do well with what we're giving them. And so, I mean, I think that we've seen I honestly feel like we've seen changes and benefits by some of the different practices that we have, but I mean, it's really hard for me to measure that. Only measurement I can say is that if we're doing less treating in the barn, I feel like we're moving in the right direction. And so that's a positive for sure. And I know the guys that I work, like my brothers, we work together on this too. And when there's less treating in the barn, everybody's just happier about the way things are. We love to go to the barn when there's no problems, right? So yeah, if there's challenges in the barn, then we have to deal with that, and that's not easy. So we want to do the best job that we can at preventing some of this nonsense. And I appreciate Max saying there, hygiene, and that's something that we can all take to heart and try and put a focus on and do well with, and I think that'll alleviate a lot of what we're having to deal with.
We're coming.
Sorry. I just want to say one more thing. I appreciate the fact, Sarah, that you're actually lifting feet regularly, looking at them, and I have a niece that is actually getting trained to do that very thing that you're talking about, and so we'll be able to do that more as it's needed. But yeah, it's something certainly that we want to be able to do well. Sorry.
We're close to time, so I'm going to rapid fire 2 questions here for you, Stephen. What % protein are you aiming for in the grower versus finisher ration? How much soybean versus distillers?
So I would add about 1.5 pounds of soybean meal to our 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds of soybean meal to our finisher ration. And it sounds like there's going to be a cost factor there to do that, but I feel that there's value in doing it, and maybe there will be some dollars put on the table on day one to purchase that soybean meal. But I feel that over the course of time, if the animals are more content, okay, we got another protein source in the mix that's going to digest differently, and I just feel like I'm willing to go there. So, and with the cover crops, different protein sources, I just feel like there's something to be said the way that we can manage whether it's things that are happening in the room and just allowing that to stretch out and the digestion to happen more consistently throughout rather than pushing it all into one tighter spot with a corn based protein. So yeah,
And can you
that's my sense.
another quick one for you? Can you speak to the durability of the rubber cover in your barn? There was a question to Jeff earlier about
The durability of the rubber. So yeah, so the first rubber that we had in our slatted floor barn was there for 14 years, but it probably should have been taken out a year or two sooner. So that was easy fix. Of course, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that type of rubber, but that's what was in, and we put it back in again. So it's a little different design than what we had in the beginning, but it seems to be. It's not staying in place the best. There are some mats that are coming out, so we do have to put mats back in from time to time, but it seems to be durable. I would say that we'll get 12 years out of that floor. So
thanks for that. I could ask many more questions, I'm sure, but we're getting close to time and we don't want to keep anyone late. So I just want to say thank you to both of you joining as panelists with sharing your farm strategies, the time you took to have the videos made. I think they're really wonderful. And to Mac for joining and sharing all of that. I think, we've learned a lot about economic impacts, the time to slaughter, approaching the pulling and examinations like Sarah shared that they're doing, and the preventative strategies that you're both doing. And really at the center of all of that is welfare for our cattle and taking good care of them. And so really appreciate you guys all sharing tips and how you're managing it.